Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Music Beats Central. I'm your host, Hanan, and to all my returning listeners and everyone joining us for the first time, welcome to the MBC fam. This is the place where music comes to life through the stories, artists, albums, trends, and moments that shape the soundtrack of our lives. Before we begin today's episode, I've got some exciting news to share. Music Beats Central has officially launched its new home online at www.musicbeatscentral.com.au. Whether you're discovering us for the very first time or you've been a part of this journey for years, I'd love for you to visit the new website where you'll find the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, artist features, and so much more. If you're an artist who'd like your music considered for a feature on a future episode, or you're a listener who has a favorite artist you would love to have featured also on a future episode, I'd love to hear from you. You can now reach me directly at info@musicbeatcentral.com.au. Music Beat Central has always been about celebrating great music, supporting artists, and bringing music lovers together. And I'm so excited for this next chapter. Now, before we dive into today's episode, let's take a quick look back at episode 6, The Evolution of Music. In our last episode, we explored the incredible journey of music through the decades, from the days of vinyl records and cassette tapes to CDs, streaming services, and the digital age we know today. We looked at how technology has transformed the way music is created, shared, and discovered, celebrated unforgettable moments in music history, put your knowledge to the test with our music trivia, and shines the spotlight on some fantastic artists making their mark today. If you haven't had the chance to listen yet, I definitely recommend going back and checking it out after today's episode. Today's episode marks an exciting milestone for the podcast because for the very first time, we are presenting a feature-length Music Beat Central music documentary. While this is still episode 7 of the podcast, we're taking a deeper dive into the life, music, and legacy of one extraordinary artist through a documentary-style journey filled with music history, behind-the-scenes stories, career-defining moments, and the songs that made an impact around the world. So settle in, get comfortable, and join me as we explore the remarkable story of one of the most distinctive voices of the past 3 decades. This is Anastacia. Before we begin, I'd like you to think back. The year is 2000. You're walking through your local music store, CDs line every shelf. Music television is still one of the biggest ways to discover new artists. Radio presenters decide which songs become hits. Streaming doesn't exist. Social media does not exist. TikTok certainly does not exist. Music spreads differently. If a song is going to become a worldwide hit, people need to hear it again and again and again. The biggest names in pop are dominating every chart around the globe. Think Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Destiny's Child, Jennifer Lopez, the Backstreet Boys, NSYNC. Teen pop is everywhere. The music industry is obsessed with youth. Record labels are investing millions in finding artists who fit a very particular image. Everything is carefully planned. Everything is carefully marketed. Then, one afternoon, radio listeners hear something unexpected. A voice unlike anything else on the charts. It isn't polished in the traditional pop sense. It has grit, texture, soul. There's a confidence in every note, an attitude that feels completely authentic. And before the song has even reached the chorus, people are asking, who is this? That song was I'm Outta Love And that voice belonged to Anastacia. One thing I've learned while creating Music Beat Central is that music history is full of artists who were told, no, you're too young, too old, too different, too unusual, no, too commercial, not commercial enough. History has shown us something fascinating. Many of those artists who were once considered too different eventually became the very people who changed music forever. Think about Freddie Mercury, David Bowie, Tina Turner. Think about Pink. None of them truly fit the mold of their time. Neither did Anastacia. In fact, her story reminds us of something very important. Sometimes the music industry doesn't recognize greatness immediately. Sometimes audiences discover it first. Throughout today's documentary, I'm going to ask you to do something. Listen carefully, or listen differently, rather. Not just to Anastasia's songs, but to how they're constructed, to how she performs them, to why they work. Because there's a huge difference between liking a song and understanding why it connects with millions of people. We'll step inside recording studios, we'll explore songwriting sessions, we'll travel through Europe, we'll revisit charts battles, Australia, America, we'll hear from critics, we'll explore fan reactions, and together we'll discover why Anastacia became one of the biggest international artists of the early 2000s. Every famous artist has two stories, the one we know and the one that happened before anyone was watching, long before platinum albums, long before sold out arenas, long before millions of people knew her name. There was simply a young girl growing up surrounded by music. Anastacia Lynn Newkirk was born in Chicago, Illinois on the 17th of September 1968. Music wasn't something that entered her life later. It was already there from the beginning. Her father, Robert Newkirk, was a singer. Her mother, Diane Hurley, worked on Broadway. Imagine growing up in that environment. Conversations about rehearsals, performances, music, creativity. For many children, those experiences would have felt ordinary. Looking back, they were quietly preparing her for the career that lay ahead. After her parents separated, the family moved to New York City. That move would prove far more important than anyone realized, because New York wasn't simply another city, it was one of the world's greatest musical classrooms. Jazz clubs, Broadway, hip hop, soul, rock, Latin music, classical music, every style imaginable existed within a few city blocks. Whether she realized it or not, Anastacia was absorbing every influence around her. Years later, when critics struggled to describe her music, the answer had already been written during those childhood years. She wasn't one genre, she was many. Every documentary has a turning point. For Anastacia, the first arrived when she was just 13 years old. She was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. For those unfamiliar with the condition, Crohn's is a lifelong inflammatory bowel disease that can affect every aspect of a person's daily life. Pain, fatigue, hospital visits, uncertainty. It's difficult enough for an adult to manage. Imagine facing it as a teenager. Most young people that age are discovering who they are, planning their future, dreaming about careers. Anastacia was learning something far more valuable, resilience. And although she couldn't possibly have known it at the time, that resilience would become one of the defining characteristics of her career, not just once, but again and again and again. Before deciding to pursue music professionally, Anastacia once imagined a very different future. She had a fascination with archaeology and history and briefly considered a career exploring ancient civilizations. It's one of those wonderful what if moments in music history. Imagine a world where one of the most recognizable voices of the 2000s never entered a recording studio at all. Fortunately for music lovers, life had other plans. Long before audiences recognized her voice, they noticed something else: her ability to perform. Before becoming a singer, Anastacia worked as a dancer. Appearing on television and in music related productions taught her something many young performers spend years trying to master: confidence. How to connect with an audience, how to move naturally on stage, how to tell a story without saying a word. Watch any Anastacia concert today. Notice how she moves, how she gestures, how she smiles, how she draws people into the performance. That's not something that happened overnight. It was built through years of experience, and it became one of the many qualities that separated her from other singers. But there was one obstacle she couldn't dance around: the music industry itself. And in the next chapter, we're going to discover why nearly every record company believed Anastasia simply didn't fit. Ironically, that would become the very reason millions of people fell in love with her. There's something fascinating about the music industry. It has an incredible ability to recognize talent and an equally incredible ability to overlook it. History is filled with artists who were told they weren't good enough, too unconventional, too old, too loud, too quiet, too different. Thankfully, audiences often see what executives don't, and Anastasia's story is one of the greatest examples of that. When we think about successful musicians, we usually begin with their first hits, but that's not where success begins. Success begins in the years nobody sees: the auditions, the rejection letters, the jobs that pay the rent while you're chasing a dream, the moments where giving up feels like the sensible option. For Anastasia, those years lasted much longer than people realize. Before signing her first recording contract, she worked a variety of ordinary jobs. She waited tables, worked in retail, taught aerobics, worked as a secretary, even spent time working in a bakery. There are jobs millions of people do every day. At the time, they probably seemed like temporary ways to earn a living. Looking back, they became part of the story. Imagine walking into a cafe in New York during the early 1990s. The woman serving your coffee. One day she'd perform for thousands of people across Europe. It's a reminder that extraordinary futures often begin in very ordinary places. Music wasn't Anastasia's first professional language. Movement was. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, she built experience as a dancer. She appeared on television, performed in music programs, worked alongside established performers. Every appearance was another lesson: how to control nerves, how to work in front of cameras, how to hold an audience's attention without saying a single word. Those years rarely make the headlines, but ask almost any experienced performer and they'll tell you confidence isn't something you're born with. It's something you earn. And by the time Anastasia finally stepped behind a microphone as a recording artist, she already knew how to earn a stage. Let's pause the story for a moment. It's the mid 1990s. The musical landscape is changing rapidly. Grunge has transformed rock music. R&B is becoming more sophisticated. Mariah Carey is redefining vocal pop. Whitney Houston continues to dominate with extraordinary vocal performances. Meanwhile, a new generation of pop stars is just around the corner. Record companies aren't simply looking for singers anymore. They're looking for complete packages: youth, image, marketability, someone who can sell millions of records worldwide. It sounds harsh, but talent alone isn't enough. That's the world Anastacia is trying to enter. Every artist eventually asks themselves one question: should I change who I am to fit in? For Anastacia, the answer was always no. And that made life much harder. Record executives struggled to categorize her. Was she soul, rock, pop, adult contemporary? The truth was, she was all of them. Today, we celebrate artists who blend genres. Think about artists who move effortlessly between pop, country, rock, and R&B. But in the late 1990s, the industry preferred labels, simple labels, because simple labels were easier to market. Anastacia refused to simplify herself. That decision almost cost her the career she dreamed about. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been told you were too different? Maybe at school, at work, or perhaps simply because you didn't fit someone else's expectations. If so, then you already understand a small part of Anastasia's story. Because every rejection she experienced carried the same message: you're talented, but we don't know what to do with you. Imagine hearing that over and over and over again. Most people would have stopped trying. She didn't. Then, in 1998, opportunity knocked. MTV launched a talent competition called The Cut. Unlike many television competitions today, this wasn't built around dramatic backstories. It was about finding genuine talent. Thousands applied, only a handful would make an impression. Anastacia walked onto the stage carrying years of rejection, years of disappointment, years of wondering whether her dream would ever become reality. She didn't win the competition, and strangely, that hardly matters, because sometimes success doesn't come from winning, it comes from being noticed. The moment record executives heard her voice, everything changed. It wasn't polished, it wasn't manufactured, it was real, raw, powerful, authentic. One executive later described hearing her as something you simply couldn't ignore. And that's perhaps the best description of Anastasia's voice. You simply hear it, you remember it. One thing producers noticed immediately wasn't just how powerful Anastacia could sing, it was how expressive she was. Many singers can hit impressive notes, fewer can tell a story. Listen carefully to almost any Anastacia performance. Notice how she changes the color of her voice. Sometimes it's warm, sometimes it's gritty, sometimes almost whispered. She's acting through music. Every lyric carries intention. That's one reason her songs feel believable. She's never simply singing words, she's living them. Soon after the cut, Anastacia signed with Daylight Records. For most artists, signing a recording contract feels like the finish line. In reality, it's the starting line. Now came the real challenge: creating a debut album, finding producers, choosing songwriters, discovering what kind of artist she wanted to become. The record label believed they had something special. But nobody, not even they, could have predicted just how quickly the world would embrace her. When Anastacia entered the music industry professionally, she was around 30 years old. Today, that might not seem unusual, but in 1999, it was almost unheard of for a major record label to introduce a brand new female pop artist at that age. Many executives believed audiences only wanted teenage stars. Anastacia proved them wrong completely. It's a reminder that great music doesn't come with an age limit. Sometimes experience gives an artist exactly the depth they've been missing. Think about the first time you heard Anastacia. Maybe it was driving in the car. Maybe it was on the radio at work. Maybe you saw the music video on television, which is me, because the first time I ever saw her song "I'm Outta Love" was on TV, on Video Hits. That's when I first saw her video clip. Perhaps you couldn't remember the song title, but you remembered the voice. That's the sign of a truly distinctive artist. There are thousands of technically gifted singers. Very few are instantly recognizable. Anastacia belongs to that rare group. One note, one phrase, one line, and you know exactly who's singing. That isn't something producers create. It can't be taught. It's simply who she is. Every great career has one defining moment. For the Beatles, it was Love Me Do. For Whitney Houston, it was Saving All My Love for You. For Celine Dion, it was The Power of Love. Have you noticed they're all love songs? Just picked up on that. And even with Anastasia's song I'm Outta Love. Do you guys get the pattern there? For Anastacia, it would be a song rather that almost every music fan can recognize within seconds. A song that would conquer Europe, captivate Australia, and introduce one of the most powerful new voices of a generation. In the next chapter, we'll step inside the recording studio to uncover the fascinating story behind I'm Outta Love. How was it written? Why did producers know immediately that it was special? Why did it explode across Europe and Australia? And why did the United States take much longer to embrace the artist the rest of the world had already fallen in love with? Trust me, that's a story worth telling. If you've ever spoken to a songwriter, a producer, or even a record executive, they'll often tell you the same thing. Nobody truly knows what makes a hit song. There are songs everyone expects to become global successes that quietly disappear. Then there are songs with very little expectation that suddenly seem to be everywhere. Radio, television, nightclubs, shopping centers, car stereos, sporting events. Before long, they become part of everyday life. At the beginning of the year 2000, that's exactly what happened to Anastacia. Imagine walking into a recording studio. The room is quiet except for a piano in one corner. There are notebooks filled with unfinished lyrics, coffee cups scattered across the mixing desk, engineers adjusting microphones, producers discussing arrangements. No one in that room is saying, let's create one of the biggest international hits of the year. Because music doesn't work like that. The goal is always much simpler. Create something honest. Create something memorable. Create something that people will want to hear again. During the recording of her debut album, Not That Kind, Anastacia and her team weren't chasing trends. If anything, they were trying to avoid them. They knew they had something unique. The challenge wasn't changing Anastacia, the challenge was finding the perfect song to introduce her to the world. Let's do something together. Close your eyes for a moment. Yes, I'm talking to you, the one that's listening to this podcast. Imagine hearing I'm Outta Love for the very first time. The opening groove begins. Within seconds, the rhythm locks into place. Then that unmistakable voice enters. Not shouting, not trying to impress anyone, just telling a story. It's confident, it's controlled, almost conversational. And then the chorus arrives. Sorry, I just had to take a glass of water. Suddenly, everything expands. The instruments become wider, the energy lifts, the backing vocals appear. Anastasia's voice climbs effortlessly above the arrangement. It's exhilarating. Even today, more than 2 decades later, the chorus still delivers exactly the same emotional impact. That's the mark of a beautifully constructed pop record. Let's put on our producer headphones for a moment. One of the cleverest things about I'm Outta Love isn't actually the chorus, it's what happens before it. Listen to the verse. Notice how restrained everything feels. The drums are solid but never overpowering. The keyboards create movement without becoming the focus. The bass quietly drives the groove. Every instrument leaves space. And that space is intentional because when the chorus finally arrives, the song suddenly feels enormous. Nothing magical has happened. The producer hasn't simply turned the volume up. Instead, extra layers have been added: backing vocals, wider guitars, additional percussion, more harmonic movements. Your ears interpret all those extra layers as excitement. It's one of pop music's oldest production techniques, and when it's done well, you don't notice it consciously, you simply feel it. Now, let's look at the lyrics. At first glance, I'm Outta Love sounds like another relationship song. But look a little closer. This isn't someone pleading for another chance, it's someone reclaiming control. There's confidence in the writing, independence, self respect. At the beginning of the 2000s, that message resonated with listeners around the world. The song wasn't about revenge, it wasn't about anger, it was about recognizing your own worth. Perhaps that's one reason it connected so strongly with audiences. We've all reached moments in life where we've had to walk away from something that no longer serves us: relationships, jobs, dreams that have changed. The lyrics speak to that universal experience. Let's travel back to the year 2000. Music television channels are still hugely influential. If your video receives heavy rotation, millions of people see it. CD sales are booming. Napster, does anyone remember Napster? LimeWire has only just begun changing the music industry. Pop music is enjoying one of its biggest commercial periods. At the same time, rock music is evolving. R&B is reaching new creative heights. Dance music dominates clubs across Europe. Against that backdrop, Anastacia arrives. She doesn't sound like Britney Spears. She doesn't sound like Christina Aguilera. She doesn't sound like Destiny's Child. She doesn't sound like anyone. And perhaps that's exactly why listeners remembered her. Music videos were still incredibly important in 2000. They weren't just promotional tools. They introduced artists visually to millions of viewers. Anastasia's video for I'm Outta Love perfectly matched the song. Confident, energetic, stylish, but never overproduced. There was something refreshingly genuine about her. She wasn't trying to play a character, she simply looked comfortable being herself. Those now iconic tinted glasses became rather part of her identity. Interestingly, they weren't originally chosen as a fashion statement. They were connected to her sensitivity to bright lights. Over time, what began as a practical necessity became one of the most recognizable images in pop music. Sometimes our greatest signature begins as something completely unexpected. Just to add my, I guess, nostalgia of that, I actually got inspired by Anastacia with the tinted eyeglasses. I did that also back in 2000, I think. 2001, I think. And I had my eyeglasses tinted blue because I love that. And I just got inspired by her. So I wanted that. It wasn't because my eyes were sensitive. I just liked that concept of, tinted eyeglasses. And I remember my teachers, they thought that they were sunglasses, but of course they were not. They were my eyeglasses. So yeah, I got inspired at one point wearing tinted eyeglasses because I got inspired by Anastasia. So just a little FYI about me. Alright, back to the podcast. One of the most fascinating aspects of Anastasia's career is how quickly Europe embraced her. While American radio was still deciding where she belonged, Europe had already made its decision. Germany loved her. The Netherlands loved her. So did Belgium, Switzerland, Italy, Spain, the United Kingdom. The song climbed charts across the continent, and before long, Anastacia had become one of Europe's biggest new artists. Music journalists began asking an interesting question. Why was Europe responding so enthusiastically? Part of the answer lies in European radio. Many stations were far more open to artists who blended genres soul, rock, pop. Rather than trying to fit Anastacia into a single category, European audiences simply enjoyed the music. Sometimes listeners don't care what label a record belongs to, they just know when a song makes them feel something. Australia wasn't far behind. Radio stations embraced I'm Outta Love almost immediately. Music fans here have always appreciated strong vocalists, artists who perform live, artists who sound authentic. Anastacia ticked every one of those boxes. The single became a major hit. The album followed, and over the years, Australia developed a lasting relationship with Anastacia that continues to this day. It's one of those wonderful examples of music crossing oceans, a singer from Chicago finding some of her most passionate supporters on the other side of the world. With the success of I'm Outta Love, expectations for Anastasia's debut album were enormous. Fortunately, Not That Kind delivered. What makes this album interesting isn't simply the quality of the songs, it's the confidence. Rather than filling the record with 12 versions of the same hit, the album explores different musical directions. There's funk, soul, rock, R&B, dance influences, power ballads, up-tempo anthems. It feels like an artist introducing every side of her personality. Looking back now, it's easy to see why the album connected. Listeners weren't buying a single, they were discovering an artist. One of the album's highlights is the title track. It's playful, funky, full of attitude, but beneath the groove lies another important message. Don't assume you know who I am. In many ways, that message perfectly summed up Anastacia herself. She refused to fit stereotypes. She refused to become what others expected. And throughout her career, that authenticity became one of her greatest strengths. Reviews of Not That Kind varied from publication to publication. Some critics focused on the strength of the songwriting, others praised the production. But almost every review mentioned one thing: the voice. Many reviewers described Anastacia as one of the most exciting new vocalists to emerge in years, not because she sounded fashionable, because she sounded original. Originality is difficult to manufacture. It's something audiences recognize instinctively, and from the very beginning, people recognized it in Anastacia. You know, there's something I find really inspiring about this part of Anastasia's journey. She spent years hearing that she didn't fit the mold. Then, almost overnight, the very qualities people once questioned became the reasons audiences embraced her. It reminds me that sometimes our greatest strengths are the things we're encouraged to change. Perhaps the lesson isn't to become more like everyone else. Perhaps the lesson is to become more like ourselves. One successful album is impressive, but the music industry has a saying: you make your career with your second album. The pressure on Anastacia had never been greater. Could she deliver another hit? Or would I'm Outta Love become the only song people remembered? The answer came in 2001 with an album that proved beyond any doubt she wasn't just another pop singer. She was becoming one of the defining voices of her generation. Join me next as we explore the remarkable story behind Freak of Nature. There's a phrase in the music business that every artist eventually hears: the difficult second album. It's almost spoken like a warning. Your first album introduces you, your second album proves whether you belong. History is full of artists who released incredible debut albums, only to disappear a few years later. Some struggled with pressure, others ran out of ideas. Some simply couldn't escape the shadow of that first hit. By the end of the year 2000, the same questions were beginning to surround Anastacia. Can she do it again? Was I'm Outta Love simply lightning in a bottle? Or is there something much bigger happening here? The answer would arrive sooner than anyone expected, and it would silence almost every critic. Imagine finally achieving everything you've dreamed about. Your debut album has sold millions. You've traveled the world, appearing on television, meeting fans, winning awards, living the dream. Now imagine someone placing a blank notebook in front of you and saying, right, now do it again. That's the challenge every successful artist faces because success changes the creative process. When Anastacia recorded Not That Kind, she had years of experience to draw upon: years of rejection, years of dreaming, years of waiting. But after success, life becomes busy. Tour buses replace quiet afternoons. Interviews replace writing sessions. Hotels replace home. The very thing you've worked towards suddenly leaves you with less time to create. And that's why so many second albums become defining moments. Let's step back into 2001. The music world is changing again. The charts are filled with enormous names. Kylie Minogue has reinvented herself with Can't Get You Out of My Head. Alicia Keys has arrived with Fallen, reminding audiences of the power of soul music. Destiny's Child continued to dominate. Pink is beginning to move away from bubblegum pop and embrace a rock-influenced sound. Meanwhile, rock music is experiencing a resurgence through artists blending mainstream melodies with heavier production. It was an exciting time, but it was also fiercely competitive. Every week, another future classic seemed to arrive. Standing out wasn't easy. Remaining relevant was even harder. When Anastacia announced her second album, the title alone caught people's attention: Freak of Nature. It's a fascinating title. At first glance, it sounds provocative, almost rebellious. But perhaps that's exactly the point. Throughout her career, she's been told she didn't fit. Too soulful for pop, too rocky for soul, too mature for teen pop, too unconventional for commercial radio. Instead of resisting those labels, she embraced them. If being different made her a freak of nature, then so be it. The title became a celebration of individuality rather than an apology for it. Listening to Freak of Nature today, one thing becomes immediately obvious. This isn't Not That Kind Part 2. It's bigger, bolder, more confident. The production has evolved. The guitars sit further forward in the mix. The drums carry greater weight. The arrangements are more ambitious, and vocally, Anastacia sounds fearless. That's often what happens when an artist stops worrying about proving themselves. They simply begin making the music they believe in. Let's put our headphones back on. One of the subtle differences between Not That Kind and Freak of Nature lies in the production. Listen carefully to the rhythm section. The bass guitar has become more aggressive. The kick drum has more punch. The electric guitars aren't simply accompanying the songs anymore. They're driving them. This gives the album a stronger rock foundation while still allowing the pop melodies to shine. It's a perfect example of balance. Too much rock, and mainstream pop audiences may have drifted away. Too much pop, and the emotional power would have been reduced. Instead, the producers found the sweet spot. If I'm Outta Love introduced Anastacia, Paid My Dues announced that she wasn't leaving, released as the album's lead single, it immediately sounded different. Stronger, more direct, almost confrontational, but not angry. Confident. The title itself says everything. I've paid my dues. It's a phrase people use when they've worked hard to earn respect. For Anastacia, those words weren't simply lyrics. They reflected years of auditions, years of rejection, years of hearing that she didn't fit in the industry expectations. Now, she wasn't asking for acceptance, she'd earned it. Listen carefully to the opening. So make sure you put the song so you can listen to the song, because unfortunately, I'm not able to play the song due to copyright. The guitars arrive almost immediately for Paid My Dues. The rhythm section wastes no times. The energy is relentless. Unlike I'm Outta Love, which builds patiently towards its chorus, Paid My Dues announces itself from the very first bars. It's almost as though Anastacia is saying, I'm here, I'm confident, and I have something to say. Her vocal performance mirrors that confidence beautifully. Notice how she attacks certain phrases, then softens others. She's constantly controlling the emotional intensity rather than singing every line at maximum volume. That's a sign of an experienced vocalist. Power means very little without control. Anastacia has both. One reason many vocal coaches admire Anastacia is her remarkable breath control. Listen to her live performances. Notice how she moves constantly across the stage while maintaining impressive vocal consistency. That's incredibly difficult. Singing powerfully while dancing requires years of training and exceptional technique. It's one reason critics have consistently praised her live shows. Every great album needs contrast. After the determination of Paid My Dues came one of Anastacia's most emotionally mature recordings, One Day in Your Life. On the surface, it's another relationship song, but listen more carefully. This isn't about revenge, it's about perspective. Rather than demanding apologies, the lyrics quietly suggest that time has a way of teaching us lessons we refuse to learn in the moment. There's something beautifully understated about that. Musically, the arrangement gives Anastacia more room to breathe. The verses are intimate, the chorus expands naturally, nothing feels rushed. The emotion grows rather than explodes. Sometimes restraint creates a deeper impact than sheer volume. This is actually one of my favorite Anastacia songs, not because it's the loudest or the biggest hit, but because it reminds us that confidence doesn't always need to shout. Sometimes confidence simply means walking away, knowing your worth, and allowing time to tell the rest of the story. That's a message that never grows old. Then the mood changes completely. Why'd You Lie to Me bursts out of the speakers with energy. It's funky, playful, confident, and impossible not to move to. One thing I've always appreciated about Anastasia is that she never allows an album to stay in one emotional space for too long. She understands pacing. She knows like when listeners have settled into reflective ballads, not her, sorry. Just rather, sorry, I skipped a line. Just when listeners have settled into reflective ballads rather, she delivers something full of attitude. There we go. I got there in the end, guys. That's smart album sequencing. It keeps the listening experience fresh. One of the joys of revisiting older albums is discovering songs that weren't released as singles. Every fan has their favorites, tracks that somehow slipped beneath the commercial spotlight. On Freak of Nature, songs like You'll Never Be Alone, Overdue Goodbye, and I Dreamed You reveal another side of Anastasia. Less dramatic, more intimate. They're reminders that some of an artist's finest work, rather, never reaches commercial radio. They're really beautiful songs. If you haven't heard those songs on her Freak of Nature album, you should really give it a listen. Sometimes the best songs are the ones listeners discover for themselves, which is very true because that's what happened to me. When Freak of Nature was released, many critics commented on how much Anastasia had grown. The biggest compliment? She no longer sounded like an artist searching for her identity. She'd found it. Reviewers praised her willingness to blend soul, pop, and rock without sounding forced. More importantly, she wasn't following trends. She was creating her own. And that's a far more difficult achievement. While many American artists dream of conquering Europe, Anastasia was actually living that dream. By 2001, Germany had embraced her wholeheartedly. Italy adored her. The Netherlands couldn't get enough. The United Kingdom welcomed every new release. Concert venues continued to grow. Album sales continued to climb. Some journalists even began referring to Europe as Anastasia's second home. That's an extraordinary achievement for any international artist. It also proves something important. Music doesn't recognize borders. A great song belongs to everyone. One thing audiences consistently discovered after buying tickets to an Anastasia concert was this. She sounded real, not just good, real. There was no hiding behind elaborate production, no relying on studio technology. Night after night, she delivered performances that reminded audiences why she'd earned her success. That's one reason her fan base became so loyal. People trusted what they were hearing. In an era when studio perfection was becoming increasingly common, authenticity stood out. By the end of the Freak of Nature era, something important had happened. People were no longer introducing Anastasia as the singer who performs I'm Outta Love. She had become something much bigger, a respected recording artist, a powerful live performer. One of the defining voices of the early 2000s. Everything seemed to be falling into place. The future looked brighter than ever, but life sometimes has different plans. In the next chapter of our documentary, success would give way to uncertainty, the headlines would change, the concerts would stop, and Anastasia would face the greatest challenge of her life, one that had nothing to do with music and everything to do with courage. There are moments in every artist's career that define them. A breakthrough hit, a career changing album, a sold out world tour. But every now and then, life writes a chapter that no artist ever wants to experience. By the beginning of 2003, everything seemed to be falling into place for Anastasia. 2 hugely successful albums, millions of records sold, a growing international audience. Critics who now recognized her as one of the strongest vocalists of her generation. She had finally achieved everything she'd worked so hard for. Then everything stopped. Imagine spending years climbing a mountain. Every rejection, every audition, every recording session, every concert, every interview, slowly taking you closer to the summit. Then one morning, life asks you to forget about music altogether because now the only thing that matters is your health. In January 2003, during a routine medical examination before breast reduction surgery, doctors discovered breast cancer. She was just 34 years old. It was a diagnosis that no one expects to hear, least of all, someone who was preparing for the busiest period of their career. The headlines that followed were about new singles. They weren't about chart positions. They were about treatment, recovery, hope. For fans across Europe and Australia, the news came as a genuine shock. Only months earlier, they had watched Anastacia performing with incredible energy. There had been no obvious signs, no indication that behind the scenes she was about to face the greatest battle of her life. Almost overnight, promotional schedules disappeared, recording plans changed, touring stopped. Everything became secondary. For the first time since achieving international success, the future was uncertain. Let's pause for a moment and remember where the world was in 2003. Reality television was becoming increasingly popular. The internet was beginning to change how people discovered music. CD sales were still strong. Artists like Beyonce were launching solo careers. Coldplay were becoming one of the world's biggest bands. Evanescence had exploded onto the charts. The music industry never stopped moving, yet for Anastacia, time suddenly stood still. Sometimes the biggest battles happen away from the spotlight. One thing that becomes very clear when reading Anastasia's interviews from this period is her determination. She never wanted to be defined solely by illness. Yes, she spoke openly about her diagnosis. She encouraged awareness. She promoted the importance of early detection. But she also remained focused on something else: living, continuing, moving forward. That mindset became an inspiration to thousands of people facing similar challenges, not because she claimed to be fearless, but because she was honest. She admitted there were difficult days, there were moments of uncertainty, yet she refused to allow cancer to become the only chapter in her story. This is the point where Anastasia's story stopped being just about music for me. Like so many people, I've known friends and family whose lives have been touched by cancer. When someone in the public eye speaks openly about those experiences, it reminds us that illness doesn't recognize fame. It doesn't recognize success. Behind every headline is simply another human being trying to find the strength to keep going. That's one of the reasons I admire Anastacia so much. Not because she pretended everything was fine, but because she showed the world that vulnerability and strength can exist together. One of the greatest moments in any artist's career is returning after people wonder whether they'll ever perform again. For Anastacia, returning wasn't about proving anything to critics. It wasn't about selling more records. It was about reclaiming a part of herself. Music had always been where she expressed emotion, where she found freedom, where she connected with people. Now, she returned to the studio carrying experiences that would change her songwriting career. When the album arrived in 2004, Its title surprised many people. There wasn't a complicated concept, no clever phrase, no metaphor, simply Anastasia. Looking back, it makes perfect sense. After everything she'd experienced, there was nothing left to hide behind. This wasn't just another record, it was her. Commercially, the album became the most successful studio release of her career. It reached number one in several European countries and performed exceptionally well in Australia, confirming her international appeal had only grown stronger. More importantly, it shows that audiences hadn't forgotten about her. If anything, they welcomed her back with even greater affection. There are songs that become hits, then there are songs that become defining moments. Left Outside Alone belongs firmly in the second category. The opening guitar riff is unmistakable, dark, brooding, full of anticipation. Then comes Anastasia's vocal, powerful, yet carrying a vulnerability we hadn't heard quite so openly before. For years, many listeners assumed the song reflected her battle with breast cancer. In reality, the inspiration came from something much older: her relationship with her estranged father, feelings of abandonment, questions left unanswered, emotions she'd carried for years. Knowing that changes how you hear the song. It's no longer simply about heartbreak, it's about longing, about searching for acceptance, about wondering why someone walked away. Perhaps that's why the song feels so emotionally honest, because it came from somewhere deeply personal. All right, guys, let's listen differently again. So put on the song Left Outside Alone. And do you notice how Left Outside Alone never rushes? The verses are almost restrained. The guitars simmer rather than explode. The drums patiently build tension. Then the chorus arrives. Everything expands. The guitars become enormous. The harmonies widen. The rhythm section grows stronger. And Anastasia's voice soars above it all. It's one of the finest examples of dynamic arrangements in early 2000s pop rock. The production doesn't overpower the emotion, it amplifies it. That's a subtle but a very important difference. Left Outside Alone wasn't simply another successful single. It became one of the biggest songs of Anastasia's career. Across Europe, it climbed to number one in multiple countries. Australian audiences embraced it immediately. Music critics praised its emotional honesty. Radio stations kept it in heavy rotation. More than 20 years later, it's still the song many people associate with Anastacia first. That's an extraordinary achievement. Every artist hopes to create one signature song. Very few actually do. After the emotional intensity of Left Outside Alone came another standout, Sick and Tired. Despite the title, this wasn't about illness. It explored emotional fatigue, reaching the point where excuses no longer matter, where enough is finally enough. Musically, it continued Anastasia's move towards stronger rock influences. The guitars became more prominent, the production became grittier, yet somehow she never lost the melodic hooks that made her music so accessible. That's one of the most impressive balancing acts in her catalogue. If Left Outside Alone confronted emotional pain, Welcome to My Truth embraced self acceptance. The song feels almost autobiographical. Sorry. It's about removing the mask, inviting people to understand the real person behind the public image. After everything Anastacia had experienced, it became one of the most personal songs she'd ever released. Sometimes music doesn't need complicated lyrics. Sometimes honesty is enough. Then came perhaps the most emotional recording of Anastasia's career, Heavy on My Heart. There's something beautifully understated about this song. No dramatic production, no enormous chorus trying to overwhelm the listener. Instead, everything serves the emotion. Every note, every lyric, every pause. The song became closely associated with breast cancer awareness, with proceeds helping to support charitable work through her foundation. Listening today, it still feels incredibly moving, not because it's trying to make us cry, which it has made me cry many times every time I've listened to this song, because it's a very beautiful song, because it's real. Following her recovery, Anastacia became a passionate advocate for breast cancer awareness. Has repeatedly encouraged women to undertake regular health checks, speaking openly about how early detection played such a vital role in her own journey. It's another reminder that sometimes an artist's greatest legacy extends far beyond the music itself. Against all odds, Anastacia had returns. The critics applauded, fans celebrated. The concert sold out once again. But perhaps the most remarkable part of her story was still to come. How do you build a career that lasts decades rather than years? How do you continue evolving without losing the qualities that made people fall in love with your music in the first place? In the next chapter, we'll explore the years after her greatest commercial success, the albums, the tours, the unexpected challenges, the second cancer diagnosis, and the remarkable resilience that has defined Anastasia's life both on and off the stage. If there's one word that's followed us throughout today's documentary, it's resilience. Not because it's a convenient description, but because every major chapter of Anastasia's life seems to return to it. Every challenge, every setback, every comeback has revealed another layer of who she is. Some artists are remembered rather because they sold millions of records, others because they changed music. Anastacia deserves to be remembered because she refused to let life's biggest challenges silence her voice. Success in music is an interesting thing. Reaching the top is one challenge. Staying there, that's something entirely different. The mid 2000s brought enormous change to the music industry. Streaming hadn't arrived yet, but downloading music online was becoming increasingly common. Television music channels were losing some of their influence. Reality television competitions were introducing dozens of new artists every year. The pace of popular music was accelerating. Artists who had dominated one year could find themselves competing with an entirely new generation the next. For Anastacia, the challenge wasn't simply releasing another album, it was discovering how to keep evolving while remaining true to herself. By 2008, the charts looked very different from the ones Anastacia had entered at the beginning of the decade. Artists like Rihanna, Lady Gaga, Katy Perry, and Leona Lewis were becoming household names. Pop music was embracing electronic production. Dance music was influencing almost every genre. Social media was beginning to change the relationship between artists and fans. The industry had transformed dramatically, yet one thing remained unchanged. Authenticity still mattered, and Anastacia had built her career on exactly that. Released in 2008, Heavy Rotation represented another step forward rather than a dramatic reinvention. Some artists chase trends, others allow trends to chase them. Anastacia has generally chosen a different path. She adapts without abandoning her identity. Throughout Heavy Rotation, you can hear contemporary influences beginning to emerge. The production is cleaner, the rhythms reflect the changing sound of pop music, yet her voice, that unmistakable voice, remains unmistakably Anastacia. It's a reminder that while musical fashion changed, great vocalists never need to reinvent the very thing that makes them unique. Here's something interesting to listen for. Compare I'm Outta Love from 2000 with songs from Heavy Rotation. Notice how much brighter modern production had become. The drums are tighter, the bass is deeper, the overall sound is cleaner. Technology had evolved enormously in less than a decade. Yet, despite those changes, Anastasia's vocal still sits proudly at the center of every mix. The production never overwhelms the performance. Instead, it supports it. That's a sign of producers understanding exactly what audiences came to hear. Just when it seems life had settled into a new rhythm, another challenge arose. In 2013, Anastacia revealed that she had been diagnosed with breast cancer for a second time. It was heartbreaking news. For anyone who had followed her journey, it felt deeply unfair. Once again, concerts were postponed, plans changed, the future became uncertain. This time, Anastacia made the difficult decision to undergo a double mastectomy. It was a deeply personal choice, one she has since spoken about openly in the hope of encouraging awareness and supporting others facing similar decisions. It was another reminder that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes courage is simply making the next decision, one day at a time. I think there's something incredibly important about this chapter of Anastasia's story. Many people imagine strength as never feeling afraid, but real strength often looks very different. Real strength is acknowledging fear, then moving forward anyway. Listening to Anastacia speak in interviews over the years, one thing becomes clear. She has never pretended these experiences were easy. She simply refused to allow them to define the rest of her life. That's a lesson that reaches far beyond music. The title says everything: resurrection. Not just the return of an artist, but the return of a person. Released after her recovery, the album carries a renewed sense of optimism. There's gratitude, determination, and perhaps most importantly, joy. It doesn't ignore life's challenges, it acknowledges them, then chooses hope anyway. It's one of the reasons many longtime fans, hold this album so close to their hearts. It's impossible to separate the music from the journey that inspired it. Rather than chasing commercial trends, the songs on Resurrection celebrate something much more meaningful: survival, freedom, confidence. There's an honesty throughout the album that feels earned. Only someone who has faced genuine adversity could communicate those emotions with such authenticity. That's one of the reasons Anastasia's later work deserves to be rediscovered. Sometimes audiences focus so heavily on the biggest hits that they miss some of an artist's most mature recordings. The years that followed demonstrated something remarkable. Anastacia never stopped creating. She continued touring, recording, connecting with audiences. Her album evolution reflected exactly what its title suggested: growth, not reinvention, evolution. There's an important difference. She wasn't trying to become someone new. She was allowing herself to continue becoming more fully herself. For any artist, that's perhaps the healthiest kind of career development. One of the most fascinating aspects of Anastasia's career has always been her international audience. Germany remained one of her strongest markets. Italy continued to embrace her music. Across Europe, she remained a hugely respected live performer. Many artists spend decades trying to build the loyal audience that Anastacia achieved. Those fans stayed with her, not because every album sounded the same, but because every album sounded honest. In 2023, Anastacia surprised many listeners by releasing Our Songs. It was a wonderfully creative idea, taking songs that had become classics in German speaking countries and introducing them to English speaking audiences through entirely new interpretations. The project celebrated the extraordinary relationship she'd developed with German fans over more than 2 decades. Few American artists have enjoyed that kind of enduring connection with Europe. Anastacia has never taken it for granted. Here in Australia, our relationship with Anastacia has always felt particularly warm. Perhaps it's because Australians have always appreciated artists who can genuinely perform live. Perhaps it's because authenticity rather has always mattered here. Or perhaps it's simply because good music travels well. In 2021, Australian audiences were delighted when Anastacia appeared on The Masked Singer as the vampire. I knew immediately it was her because, I mean, she has that distinctive voice. I mean, how could you not know? For weeks, viewers guessed, debated, speculated, then the mask came off. I mean, how could they not, guess that it was not her? Sorry, I contemplate that even when I told my husband when we both watched that we were newly together at the time. And I said to him, "Oh my God, it's Anastacia." And he goes, "Oh, I'm not sure. Maybe it is her." I'm like, "No, trust me, it's her." And then when he kept hearing her perform on The Masked Singer, he's like, "Oh my God, no, it is Anastacia. You're right." And we were right. Um, and suddenly a whole new generation rediscovered one of the great voices of the 2000s. It was joyful, unexpected, and a reminder that great voices never disappear. They simply find new audiences. Even after more than 25 years in the music industry, Anastacia continues to tour extensively. That's something I really admire because touring isn't easy. It's physically demanding, emotionally demanding. And after everything she's experienced, the fact that she still walks onto stages around the world with the same passion says everything about her love of performing. When people talk about successful artists, the conversation often begins with numbers: albums sold, streams, awards, chart positions. Those things matter, but they don't tell the whole story. Anastasia's greatest achievement may not be measured in statistics. It may be measured in the people she has inspired: people living with Crohn's disease, people facing cancer, people who have been told they're too old to chase a dream, people who have been told they don't fit. Her career quietly reminds us that success doesn't always come from fitting in. Sometimes it comes from refusing to. As we prepare to close this documentary, there's one final question worth asking. How should history remember Anastacia? As a pop star, a rock singer, a soul vocalist, a survivor? Perhaps the answer is all of the above. Because reducing her career to a single label would miss the point entirely. She has always been bigger rather than categories. And perhaps that's exactly why her music continues to resonate. In our final chapter, we'll reflect on Anastasia's remarkable legacy. We'll revisit the question we asked at the very beginning of this documentary, and we'll discover why, more than 25 years after I'm Outta Love first echoed across the world's airwaves, her voice still has the power to stop us in our tracks. When we began this documentary, I asked you to imagine walking into a music store rather in the year 2000. Rows of CDs, music videos playing on television screens, radio presenters introducing the newest artists. Among them, a voice that nobody had heard before, a voice that refused to sound like anyone else, 25 years later, something remarkable has happened. Music has changed. The industry has changed. Technology has changed, but that voice still sounds unmistakably like Anastacia. It's an interesting question. What makes an artist last? Thousands of songs are released every single day. Thousands. Yet only a handful remain part of our lives years later. Why? Some people would say it's because they're great songs. Others would say it's clever marketing. Perhaps. But I think there's another answer: connection. The artists we remember are the ones who made us feel something. They gave us confidence when we needed it, comfort when life became difficult, energy when we needed motivation, hope when things seemed uncertain. Anastacia has done all of those things, not through gimmicks, not through controversy, simply through honesty. Throughout this documentary, we've talked about chart positions, platinum albums, international tours, awards, nominations. They're all impressive achievements. But here's something worth thinking about. If every chart disappeared tomorrow, would people still listen to Anastacia? I believe they would, because great music doesn't depend on statistics, it depends on emotion. That's why songs like I'm Outta Love, Left Outside Alone, Paid My Dues, Sick and Tired, and One Day in Your Life continue to find new audiences. Streaming services have introduced her catalogue to listeners who weren't even born when those songs were first released. That's the beauty of music. Every generation discovers it differently. One thing that has fascinated me while researching Anastasia's career is how little she changed simply to fit fashion. Of course, her production evolved, recording technology changed, different producers brought fresh ideas, but the artist remained recognizable. She never abandoned her powerful vocals. She never stopped blending soul, pop, and rock. She never tried to become someone she wasn't. That's surprisingly rare. Many artists spend years chasing trends. Anastacia spent her career building an identity. There's a huge difference. One is temporary, the other lasts. Let's do something one final time. Imagine placing three songs next to one another: I'm Outta Love, Left Outside Alone, Staring at the Sun. They are separate by years, different producers, different recording studios, different stages of Anastasia's life, yet there's an invisible thread connecting them: the phrasing, the emotional delivery, the unmistakable texture of her voice. That's what musicians call artistic identity. It's not just how someone sings, it's how they interpret every lyric. It's why you know it's Anastacia before the chorus has even begun. Very few artists ever achieve that. Here's something that says a great deal about Anastacia. Throughout her career, she has often described Europe as feeling like a second home. While many artists focus only on the biggest music markets, Anastacia has always embraced the countries and audiences that embraced her first. That's one reason her concerts still attract such loyal fans across Germany, Italy, Switzerland, Spain, the Netherlands, Belgium, and the United Kingdom. Loyalty works both ways. And Anastacia has never forgotten the audiences who helped build her career. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of Anastasia's story is this. Ask someone in Germany about Anastacia, and they'll likely describe a superstar. Ask someone in Italy, and they'll probably remember huge tours and unforgettable performances. Ask someone in Australia, and many will immediately begin singing I'm Outta Love or Left Outside Alone. Ask someone in America, and the answer may be completely different. Very few artists experience careers quite like that. It reminds us that success doesn't always look the same everywhere. Sometimes the world discovers an artist long before their own country truly appreciates them. Before we finish today's documentary, let's see how closely you've been listening. Question 1. What name did Anastacia create to describe her own musical style? That's right, Spook. A blend of soul, pop, and rock. So, Sprock. Question 2. Which television talent competition helped introduce Anastacia to record executives? The answer, MTV's The Cut. She didn't win the competition, but she won something far more valuable, an opportunity. Question 3. What was the title of Anastasia's third studio album? Did you get it? Anastacia. That's right. Sometimes the simplest title says the most. You know, every episode of Music Beat Central teaches me something. This one reminded me that success rarely follows the path we imagine. Anastacia wasn't an overnight success. She spent years working ordinary jobs, years hearing no, years wondering whether anyone would ever understand her music. Then, when the opportunity finally came, she was ready. Not because luck suddenly arrived, but because preparation had already been happening for years. There's a wonderful quote often attributed to the Roman philosopher Seneca. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Whether Seneca actually said those exact words or not, the sentiment perfectly describes Anastasia's journey. Opportunity arrived. She was ready. Before we say goodbye, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Imagine you're sitting in your car. The radio is quietly playing in the background. You're not really paying attention. Then a familiar guitar begins. A voice enters. Within seconds, you smile. You don't need the presenter to tell you who's singing. You already know. And that's something incredibly special because voices like that don't come along very often. They're impossible to copy, impossible to replace, and impossible to forget. Perhaps that's Anastasia's greatest legacy, not simply the millions of records sold, not the awards, not the sold out concerts, not even the extraordinary resilience she's shown throughout her life. Her greatest legacy is authenticity. She taught us that being different isn't something to hide, it's something to celebrate. She reminded us that strength isn't pretending life is easy. Strength is continuing when life becomes difficult. And she proves that one remarkable voice really can travel around the world. Thank you so much for joining me for this special documentary edition of Music Beat Central. If today's episode inspires you to revisit Anastasia's music, then I hope you'll take some time this week to listen again. Maybe you'll hear something you've never noticed before. Maybe you'll discover an album track that becomes a new favorite. Or maybe you'll simply be reminded why her music has stood the test of time. If you've enjoyed today's documentary, I'd love it if you could follow the podcast, leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform, and share this episode with another music lover. You can find me on Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and Apple Podcasts, and also on Audible. You can also visit the Music Beat Central blog for artist features, music history, album reviews, future interviews, and all of our latest podcast episodes at www.musicbeatcentral.com.au. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Music Beat Central, where the conversation continues long after the microphone is switched off. I'm Hanan Juliano. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, keep listening, keep discovering, keep supporting incredible artists because every album tells a story, every song holds a memory, and every artist leaves behind a legacy. Much love and ciao for now.